Hello, everyone. Today I'd like to talk about an interesting movie from 1994 entitled Wes Craven's New Nightmare. I say this is an interesting movie. I'm not sure I would say that it's necessarily a good movie, but it's interesting enough, I think, to make it worthwhile to watch. So I guess it's not bad enough that that I would discourage watching it, and I think the fact that it's so unique, and the concept of it is so unique insofar as the time period in which it was made. I don't think wouldn't be so unique today, but for 1994, this was a pretty innovative concept for a movie. And I think it still stands the test of time in that regard, even if in other ways I would say, acting is not necessarily the greatest, dialogue is not terrific, but but neither of those criticisms would necessarily don't really derail me from still appreciating this movie for what it was. Now, what was it? In case you didn't know, and I'm sure you do know, the 1980s. I guess this trend started in the late 70s, but really hit its stride in the 1980s. There were numerous horror films that got called splatter films or slasher films, one after another. I know they were made on the cheap. Mostly with actors and actresses that were not well known, and they were a huge success. Like teenagers, even though they were rated R, teenagers came out and watched them, just habitually. Young people loved to go to these slasher movies. Friday the 13th. Parts 1 through, 25. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but they're it's just sort of Friday the 13th, part this, part that, and that was one. The Halloween series, which I guess continued into past the 80s, but I think that the time when it was the most culturally relevant was during the 80s, and of course Nightmare on Elm Street, which also had a ton of sequels. And I have to say, speaking for myself, as a kid in the 80s, who was somebody who was growing into teenhood, I turned 18 in January of 1989. So for a lot of the 80s, I was still just a little kid, and then eventually grew into puberty and adolescence and teenagerhood with all of that implies. But I had never watched any of these movies. They didn't interest me at all. But I was the exception. I was I was an outlier in many ways, and that was just one of them. But I did see Wes Craven's New Nightmare in the movie theater when it came out in 1994 as a young man of 23, and the reason was the premise is intriguing, and it was intriguing for me, and you can see how Wes Craven, the maker of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, you see how he slid from one genre to another. How once the 80s were over, I guess there was a movie, there was like maybe Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare. Is that the last movie in the series? It was 1991, I think. But it was basically an 80s phenomenon, and things were changing. And you can see from this movie, Wes Craven's New Nightmare where the director mentions his own name in the title, and he also features in the movie how this movie marks the transition for Wes Craven from the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise to the Scream franchise, which is a product more of the 90s and I guess into the early aughts. And I know they're making new ones now, but I don't really count those. But anyway, this is a movie that is self-aware. It could be called postmodern. That was always a really annoying thing, a really pretentious thing to say. That it's postmodern. It's aware of itself as a movie. What? So the movie's watching you while you're watching it, and it's so revolutionary. I would say that the aspect of that which was interesting was the fact that it was more self-aware. The movie. Let me just tell you the premise of the movie. It's set in real life, and the main character is the actress who plays, I guess, the heroine of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies. Which I had not seen. I still haven't seen. Still don't really have any interest in seeing. Not because I'm offended by them. I just don't really care to see them. But she is played by the actress who plays herself in the movie, and so she's doing this role as herself, and it's after the last Nightmare on Elm Street movie, and she's trying to diversify, trying to get into other things, not to not be typecast in the horror movie heroine role that she'd gotten, that she'd fallen into, and then she finds that the Freddy Krueger persona is in some mysterious way bleeding into the real world, and so the movie features her. It features Robert Englund, who played Freddy, and also, of course, features Wes Craven himself. And we find out during the movie that Wes Craven is essentially writing the script for this new movie, and the movie that he's writing, the script that he's writing, is basically the movie that we're watching. So it's like, ooh, clever. Yeah, I mean, that's where some people might say, oh, it's getting too precious or too self-aware or too postmodern. But it's actually a conceit that is interesting in the context of the movie itself. So anyway, the idea is that Freddy Krueger represents some evil entity that's for the last few years been kept away from the world by being captured in film. But now now that the series is over, he's trying to find his way into the actual world, and the real Freddy Krueger is far more sinister, far more frightening, and not nearly as campy. The character Freddy Krueger, I think, became the sort of camp hero, where little kids were wearing his sharpened fingernails and so forth. We see that in the movie. We see Robert Englund playing the Freddy role, prancing around for an audience and so forth. But the real entity, whatever it is that in the movie has been identified as Freddy Krueger, he's starting to manifest himself and trying to emerge into the real world. And it's up to the heroine to to keep him down, to prevent this from happening. And it ultimately has to happen through him being captured in a story again. So it's a somewhat headier premise than the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, which were just about, I guess the concept was Freddy Krueger was this well, he was a child molester, right? Which is kind of takes things into uncomfortable territory. And I know I've watched some Jamie Deluxe videos, and I know that certain things could be said about that series and the maker of that series. I'm not going to go into any more detail about it than that. But if you're interested, watch Jamie Deluxe, and he puts it all out there. Of course, this is Hollywood we're talking about, so of course, one can't be naive about this kind of stuff happening. Anyhow, the movie shows something about how people in the 90s were starting to think about popular culture and movies and music and so forth. And I would say a good companion piece to Wes Craven's New Nightmare might be the 2001 movie Rockstar, starring Mark Wahlberg. And that movie is set primarily in the 80s. And the premise is that there's this heavy metal band that Mark Wahlberg's character loves, and he's in a tribute band where he plays the lead singer, but he does such a good imitation of him that when the lead singer himself is incapacitated and can't be their singer anymore, they actually bring him in to be their actual singer, and so he becomes an actual rock star. And so that movie shows us the whole bombastic, like, hair metal scene of the 80s, and then it sort of transforms. It shows him transforming in the 90s and becoming this sort of sensitive guy, doing like grungy stuff, like how heavy metal transformed into grunge, right? During the 80s, nobody really thought, oh, we're really going to be bombastic and totally unself-aware. Trust me, I remember the 80s. It wasn't like that. It wasn't, the whole idea wasn't, we're going to just be ignorant of the kind of excessiveness that we're throwing into our lifestyle and throwing into our movies and our music and our and our image and stuff like that. For instance, you could open a yearbook. You could open my yearbook, my high school yearbook from the 80s, and see like every single girl pretty much has got gigantic hair. And right now you look at it and you think, what in the world? Why are all these girls wearing their hair like that? It just seems so over the top. But at the time, nobody thought of it that way. It was just the fashion. So you just and when you looked at your high school yearbook, it didn't register to you like, oh, there's another girl with gigantic hair. It was just like, oh, there's another girl. Really, honestly, that's how it came across. So, we weren't self-aware in all those ways, but in the 90s there was this sort of presumption that, oh, now we're not so silly as we were in the 80s, and so grunge was like heavy metal, like loud music, but it's serious and it's weighty, and it's there was a kind of pretentiousness about that was not necessarily all that appealing. Not to say I'm defending some of the crappy heavy metal from the 80s, but at least it didn't have that type of pretentiousness about it. Anyway, the movie Wes Craven's New Nightmare in showing how Wes Craven became self-aware as a movie maker, and and how he transformed his slasher film series, with all of its camp appeal, how he transformed it into something that was much more self-aware and much more reflective of the genre that it came out of. And that you can easily see how that leads into Scream, and the Scream series, which started, I think the first movie came out in 1996, and Scream and its three original sequels were all about it was a horror movie, it was a slasher movie, but it was a self-aware, intelligent slasher movie that pointed out all the conventions of slasher films and so forth. Just the same way that grunge music supposedly was like heavy metal, but stripping away the ridiculous hair and the makeup and just having everybody wear flannel shirts and be depressed and I don't know and all that kind of thing. It shows this transformation, this cultural transformation, or this like sort of awareness of a transformation having taken place. It's less that it organically happened. It's more that somehow it just like it things progressed in this manner, where in the 80s you weren't self-aware, and then in the 90s it became this sort of cool thing to be self-aware and to point out cliches and to point out conventions and the silliness of trends and how things in the 80s were so over the top, whereas in the 80s you just didn't even think about those kinds of things. This is what I've said before about people who think who think that it was possible in the 80s to appreciate like a heavy metal band, like a hair metal band, to appreciate them ironically. It really wasn't. Nobody thought about Def Leppard or Motley Crue or Rat or any of those bands, I like them, but I'm liking them in an ironic way because I know that their style and the way that they promote themselves is so ridiculous and over the top. Nobody thought about it that way. Honest engine. And so somehow it was like in the 90s, and I think the movie I'm talking about, Wes Craven's New Nightmare, was sort of a touchstone of this. It showed the way that people wanted to see themselves now in popular culture. And I would argue that they weren't any more intelligent or they weren't any more clever than they had been, just a few years prior. But it was more like they just stepped into this new phase of being self-aware and ironic. And being self-aware and ironic was very much became the touchstone of Generation X. That may be strange for young people to hear, because they sort of. I've heard people, I've heard younger people like millennials or Gen Z types, talk about something like like a sketch by the Lonely Island comedy troupe, on SNL in the aughts, like the one where the two guys keep shooting each other, and it's just really, and then they keep playing that same song, "Ooh, what you say," and like what's it called, Dear something or other. Anyway, it became this famous sketch, and the humor of it came from how ridiculous it was and how absurd it was and how it just kept getting more and more and more absurd, and people were getting shot and then they would come back and shoot somebody again, and then like everybody was getting shot from all different directions, and it's a very funny sketch, but it was like people at the time, or what I'm hearing now, is like, this is totally Gen Z humor. And no, like that's the kind of humor that you first heard in the 90s. It was sort of the irony was the touchstone of Generation X. Before Generation X, irony really wasn't around in the same sort of way. But starting in the 90s, which is when Generation X, grew from kids into young adults, it became this hip thing in the culture. Anyhow, those are my thoughts about Wes Craven's New Nightmare. I think it's worth seeing, but more for if you're interested in cultural questions, and I think it's a lesser known movie, but it represents a cultural landmark that is important and worthwhile to pay attention to. So leave your thoughts below. Thank you very much for watching.